We are still riding the high of the Calgary Flames' most recent trade.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I'm your host, Jess Belmosto, and thank you so much for joining me here today. We have Nick Zararis back as well. Nick, how are you doing?
We're still talking hockey. Things are going well.
Yes, it's always a good sign. Today we are going to talk more about what's next for the Flames after this Lindholm trade and what the people that get paid the big bucks think of this. What are the experts saying? And just, of course, wrapping it up with our opinion. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel and get $250 in bonus bets if your bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you're getting your podcasts and on YouTube as well. We are here for you Monday through Friday, your team every day. I've already seen people doing that knee-jerk reaction of this is the greatest thing that could have happened for this situation, or oh my god, the sky's falling in Calgary even more. It's like Chicken Little.
So I think the most constructive way to look at this is we said the Flames had to start unwinding their position. They had all these assets. There are not a lot of quality assets available at this deadline. The Flames were dealing from a position of strength. They were going to be able to get good returns. The trade itself, just executing the trade itself, is good. We can all agree on that. The Flames needed to do this. That's the baseline. They needed to get this trade done because they weren't going to be able to agree to an extension. I've got some stuff on that we're going to talk about a little bit more in the next segment. Experts, what they're saying, with some of the reporting I've been able to piece together about that. But the trade needed to be done. They found a reasonable offer. That's really the end of the story for me. We won't have a declarative answer on how this trade worked out probably for at least another year or two.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is necessarily going to be a trade that people are revisiting, 7 to 10 years from now, when I would assume both of the NHL players involved in this trade are long retired. But I think that, of course, this is a step in the right direction for the Flames, regardless of if they go on to secure a wild card spot, bottom out for the rest of the season, and kick off the spring on the golf course, or whatever, somewhere in between there. But they did what they needed to do. There's a checklist for Craig Conroy, and there's another UFA off his plate. What
it means now, that I think this sends a very clear message to guys who are maybe considering staying. There's reporting on Hanifin and Tanev, which we can talk about next segment or later on. But to the guys that are considering staying, this is also a kick in the butt to say, hey, if you want to stay, let's sit down and figure out what it's going to take to get this done, or we're going to start engaging more seriously with other teams because we have to worry about the team.
Right.
We want you to be here, but no one player is bigger than the team. And for the guys who are going to be here, and for Kuzmenko, who's here now, this sets the tone for next season. I don't want to say the next 38, 40 games are effectively a preseason or a trial run, but that's what they are for next year. This is an audition period for those guys I just mentioned for when Peltier comes back, whenever Coronado gets another look, anybody else from the AHL who may or may not get a look coming back from injury, guys like Kevin Rooney, guys like Dustin Wolf perhaps getting a more prolonged look. I know I saw some reporting today that Vladar, there's not a lot of interest in. So maybe we don't see Dustin Wolf until that gets rectified. But these are steps. We have been begging the Flames to be proactive, to start making things happen. They did it. They did not get embarrassed in the trade. They got reasonable return. We can nitpick the return, and we're going to do that. Believe me, this is a hockey podcast. But at face value, everything checks out here. Everything is okay.
Yeah, and I am hopeful. I'm not saying this team is going to make a run at the Stanley Cup within the next 2 years, but I'm comfortable with what's happening. I think that you're not going to see a puzzle when there's just like the top assembled, and that's where we're at right now. We don't have all of the pieces, and I did like that Craig Conroy talked last night and said we made it clear to him that he's going to be getting a lot more ice time. He's going to be playing on the power play. Like, they're giving Kuzmenko a better opportunity than he has had this season in Vancouver.
In addition to that, for the guys who are still here, for guys who are going to be here for quite a while, like Huberdeau, like Kadri, probably like Mangiapane and Blake Coleman, I was trying to think of an appropriate analogy, but the best I could do is they're still on the Titanic watching, Lindholm, Zadorov, Hanifin, Tanev get on lifeboats off of the Titanic. It's going to be taxing. It's going to be difficult to stay engaged the back half of this season, knowing your front office told you, we don't believe in this group. I mean, that was in Julian McKenzie's article today that they lost the 4 games in a row. Greer got injured. Markstrom is dinged up. At that point, if you're a GM, you have to be responsible and say, well, I'm banking on a lot of things going my way when they haven't gone this team's way in a year and a half. It's not responsible to do that. But for the guys that are still here, who are going to have to troop through it, it's important that the rest of this season does not become I don't want to say a country club, because that's what the Islander fans were using to describe the attitude of the team under Lane Lambert. But, lackadaisical, not that competitive, just clock it in to clock out. It is important. The rest of this season will go a long way in dictating what next season looks like, because the Flames say they want to stay competitive. They don't want to do the Blackhawks or the Sharks style, continue trading off all these veterans until there's nobody recognizable on the team.
Yeah, and I really don't know if that's the most realistic approach for this team either, just because of how untradeable a majority of those veteran contracts are. But yeah, any final thoughts before we head on to the next segment here?
It is important that the rest of this season becomes a launching off point. We've talked about the Flames' need to establish who they want to be going forward. This is a first step. And we talked about this last night on our instant reaction. I don't think any of these assets are slam dunks, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Kuzmenko, I think, is probably a prime candidate to pump his statistics up a little bit and then trade him next year when he becomes an unrestricted free agent and the Flames continue to unwind their position, trading off their veteran players to continue turning over their roster, getting younger, getting cheaper. But in doing that, it's important that Kadri, Huberdeau, Weegar, Rasmus Anderson, the established veterans who are good, who have trade protection, who can't be moved. It's important that those guys buy into this idea too, because if those guys start, if their effort level becomes questioned, if their commitment to trying to win games comes into question, that's not a good environment to be bringing new, younger guys into. So it's really important that while the Flames have to take their medicine now, that this does not become a long-term spiral, because we see that happens a lot in hockey in particular, where if you don't get the first overall pick or even the second overall pick, it's really hard to make that leap from tanking to competitiveness again.
Yep. And there's already a long road ahead of the Flames, it feels like. So let's not extend that trip. Let's do what we can to patch up the hole in the tire right now. But coming up next, we are going to talk about the experts' analysis and opinions on this, because that's the fun thing about this is everyone has an opinion and can offer different insight. And we will be back right after this. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snack, and placing some super bets. Nick, I know we've talked a little bit about it, but are you placing any bets for the Super Bowl?
I gotta start digging into the props, because that's where the money's to be made, and looking at, what team is good at defending what. If you want to get in on this, I would say just throw $5 on heads or tails, whichever you're feeling in the coin toss, and just go nuts.
Yeah, because new customers, when you join today, you get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Now you can bet on not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score touchdowns, how many points will be scored, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports book partner of the NFL. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode of Locked On Flames. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're getting your podcasts, so you never miss the latest episode full of opinions, the latest news, and analysis of hopefully your favorite hockey team. I love seeing everyone's instant reactions. Like last night, that was fun.
Part of the problem with this, and this isn't indicative of just hockey, this is a sports media at large issue. You don't know who's pulling punches and who's being serious. Mm-hmm. You can never tell who's trying to play a character where, the analytics people will be like, well, this trade is inefficient because of this, versus the guys who just watch the games who are, well, this guy does this, and this well, he means this, blah, 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 blah. And it's hard to ascertain a real average opinion, a real, not average opinion, that's not the word I'm looking, a real sample reflective of opinion online, because you don't know who's being genuine or not. But as far as, the professional people who are writing
qualified?
Or you don't even have to be qualified to write about hockey. You can just write about hockey. And if people stumble upon it, they stumble upon it. You can make a TikTok, you can make a YouTube video, whatever. Anybody can do that. But of the people whose opinions I generally read, I respect, the general consensus is the Canucks needed to push some chips in because they're better than they expected to be. And the NHL is kind of wide open right now. Nobody's really screaming dominant. There are good, don't get me wrong, there are more good teams in the West, but it's important, and we'll talk about it more in a minute. It's important for whoever's going to win that Pacific Division, because you avoid playing the Oilers or the Golden Knights in the first round if you finish first in the Pacific. It's really important you do that, because you would play either Nashville, Arizona, or Seattle in the first round if you win the Pacific, versus having to play Edmonton or Vegas in the first round. And then if you win in the first round, you would have had to play the other one if you were the other team. So it's really important that you win this division. So from the Canucks perspective, they really did have to do this.
Yeah. And I feel like there's always going to be moves like that from the true contenders. They're going to be buyers. And I think back to the Bruins 2019 season when they went out and got Charlie Coyle and Chris Wagner, good depth guy, but they weren't afraid to make moves. And granted, it didn't end well for them, but both players they did what they were brought in to do, and then some.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because generally speaking, the teams that make the splash move, the big move, don't don't usually win the Stanley Cup. It's usually the team that adds the depth forward that plays in the top 9 or that extra bottom pair defenseman to really deepen and elongate their lineup, because it's hard. We talked about this last night. Dropping Lindholm into that situation, from what I understand, it looks like they are going to start by playing him with Elias Pettersson and putting JT Miller with Brock Besser, but they also have the option to go back to some combination of what they had been doing, where they put Pettersson with Besser and JT Miller, and then putting Elias Lindholm on the second line with Nils Höglander and any other combination. But dropping somebody into a team's top 6, he's going to slide into their first power play. That's a lot of responsibility to take on and try and pick up on the fly for a team that's got these expectations now because they went and brought you in.
Yeah, and especially a competitive team like that, I think, and a team that is getting their real taste of a quality season for the first time in quite a long time. So there is that extra pressure, but there's also that excitement because you're going from a team that is not very, very good to a team that has the potential to go on a deep playoff run. You have top tier players. It's not a poorly constructed roster. You're not going to die there. There's some hope.
And that's where I think a lot of people who were just looking at the snapshots of Elias Lindholm's season this year are they're not getting the full picture. He's shooting about 3-4% off his career pace. If he was shooting closer to his career average, he would be in the neighborhood of 18 or 19 goals, which is a lot more in line with his rate stats, what they would be for a full season. So going to a better environment, a team that plays better defense, where he's going to have more complementary pieces as opposed to having to drive the boat himself. There are a lot of things from the Canucks perspective that I think I like this trade for them. And as for the Flames, we talked about the idea last night that it's really going to come down to what your opinion of these prospects are, because Kuzmenko is already 26, turning 27. He's only under contract for 1 more year, may or may not stay long term. The first round pick is going to be in the late 20s, is going to be at least in the 20s, if not later than that. So you're not getting any slam dunk blue chips. You went for quantity of assets over quality. You probably could have done a version of this where you could have gotten one of the Canucks slam dunk prospects and Kuzmenko, because the Canucks needed to send Kuzmenko out for the money, and that was it. But the Flames wanted picks. They wanted prospects. They wanted to restock the cupboard. Conroy had mentioned that they haven't drafted a defenseman in a while, relatively high, so they wanted to start rebuilding out that pool, start developing guys. And the guys they did bring in, there's a plan here. They clearly see they're probably going to trade at least one more of the defensemen, whether it be Tanev or Hanifin, and they need to slowly start restocking the cupboard for the future of the team.
Yeah, because it's much better to do it that way than be scrambling. We say it all the time on this show. You got to be proactive and not reactive. And I do worry about this team's defensive depth, especially with Rasmus Andersson. But I think by the time his next contract extension hits, it's he'll be 30 or 29 or 30. So like you are kind of teetering on that more risky long-term extension thing again. But I don't know. I don't hate this because you do have the ability to package those things, the prospects and picks elsewhere if you want to. You can hold on to that first round pick, but okay, the conditional one can go, the 2 prospects at some point. It like just to sweeten a deal, to get it done.
It all depends on what you're trying to do. The Flames clearly don't know what their next steps are. So the worst case, they just have more assets to play with. We talked about the idea maybe they trade the first round pick to get something in the summer. Maybe they trade these prospects for something when a player becomes more available and they have a better idea of what the overall league salary cap situation is going to look like in the summer. So there's a lot more options. Sure, you would ideally like to have fewer assets to trade because then it's easier to move them. The more assets you have to liquidate, the harder it can be to make trades. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit in the next segment where we talk about some of the reporting that's out there about what's still going to happen. But as far as baseline, nobody thinks the Flames got robbed, but some people think the Flames probably could have gotten one really good asset as opposed to four okay assets.
Yes, and this is again one of Craig Conroy's early trades, and this is the first one I think I'm content with. And if you want more of the initial reaction and our thoughts on that, make sure you listen to yesterday's episode, Wednesday's episode, and let us know what you think, because it is important that, you share your opinions with us too. We don't want to be the only ones talking. But coming up next, we are going to wrap up the show with some more market rumors and what could be on the horizon for the Calgary Flames. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode. Make sure you're following us on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Jess Belmosto and at Nick Zararis. We talked a little bit last night after we finished recording about the reports being they want a first-round pick for Tanev. Is that realistic?
I read Pierre LeBrun's column like an hour ago, and he said if they had a first-round pick offer, it would have been done already, because that's what they've been asking for a few months now. Nobody has offered a first-round pick. A lot of people think it will more likely than not be a second-round pick or a second-round pick and a prospect in that middle range tier, kind of similar to what they got in this trade already, something of that tier. A prospect who was taken probably second, third, fourth round sometime in the last 2 or 3 years, who's got a little bit of upside. That seems to be what the price would be to get Tanev done right now. I know part of the reason the Leafs haven't done it yet is they don't have a second round pick this year because they traded theirs last year. I forget in which trade last year that they traded their second, but we all know Brad wants to get him to Toronto. It's just a matter of if he's actually going to be able to do it.
I hope he gets to go somewhere where he will have a true shot at winning the Stanley Cup. I don't have faith in the Toronto Maple Leafs, and that's my own bias jumping out, but I don't know. Something poetic about him going back to Vancouver and winning a cup would be nice.
Yeah, there's something there, and that's something that I also found relatively interesting in reading what I was reading earlier. I forget whose column it was in, but Lindholm was one of the reasons that Jacob Markstrom ultimately signed in Calgary originally a couple of years ago, and that was part of the reasoning. I think it was in Pierre LeBrun's column that he thinks that if a decent team came calling about Markstrom, because the Flames have gotten calls on Markstrom from what I've read, but nothing serious because the Flames were and are still trying to be relatively competitive. But I could see a world where the Devils call and say, can we do Tanev and Markstrom? What would it take to do that? Because they need D and a goalie. Or if you're a team that just needs a goalie, I could see a world where Lindholm's not there. Markstrom's got 2 years left on his contract. He's got a full no move. He can be the one to determine if and when he wants to go. He's playing pretty well right now. If he doesn't want to relocate and just wants to ride it out in Calgary, all the power to him. If he wants to go somewhere and try and win a Stanley Cup, he will more likely than not have that opportunity based on what we know so far.
Yeah, and I remember when he signed the same summer that Chris Tanev signed, and I truly thought that Chris Tanev his contract would not age well out of the two. And I'm not unhappy with either of their performances. I think and they're at the point in their career where they absolutely can dictate where they want to go. And I mean, Markstrom literally has the power to do it. And I'm sure Chris Tanev will have many discussions.
For sure. From what I understand, they are still trying to engage on Tanev and Hanifin to keep them. They would like to keep them here. Sure, that might just be posturing that's getting reported, so it's leaked out, so other teams are more inclined to increase whatever offer they're going to make for both of those players. But from what I understand, Tanev is more likely than Hanifin to be traded. They're willing to listen on both, but they are still trying to extend both players. Again, you don't know if that's posturing or not. And then Markstrom is possibly available if the right call came. So we don't know, frankly. It's early. We've still got another 5 weeks till the deadline. There's going to be more movement. There are going to be teams that are currently in the mix right now that are going to fall out of it. But the Flames do still hold probably the best defenseman on the market in Hanifin and one of the more coveted players in Tanev. So they still have a lot of chips to play.
Definitely. And part of me wonders if a deal hasn't been done with Tanev for a trade, I guess. Are teams not willing to take the risk to sign a guy that has the injury resume that he has, even though they're really strictly looking at him and looking at the playoff picture and counting on him to be here? But what if an injury happens, if that makes any sense?
It's the real conundrum you have. We could have the same conversation about Sean Monahan in Montreal, who's got a long checkered injury history, but is available. And now that Lindholm's been traded, he's arguably the best or second best center of it, pending unrestricted free agent center, him or Adam Henrique, whoever you prefer. But he's got a long injury history. Tanev has a long injury history. Those are the types of risks you have to calculate when you are making this. If you trust your medical team's ability to evaluate, you'll look at the medicals when you agree to the trade. If you think you can manage their injury history and take care of them, hockey's an inherently dangerous sport. There's no way to play hockey safely. It's a risk. If you are trying to win the Stanley Cup and you win the Stanley Cup, nobody cares. Yeah. Nobody cares. You win the Stanley Cup. It doesn't matter what you do after that. You think about some of the contracts that have gotten handed out over the last couple of years to guys in Colorado, Tampa, St. Louis, Washington, Pittsburgh, where they won, they took care of their guys. You think about the extension that Eric Chernak signed, like a 7-year extension for $5.5 million a year. He's just as hurt as Tanev. And he was only like 26 when he signed that contract. And he's arguably as injured as Tanev. But they won their Stanley Cups. So they had the leeway of saying, we won our cups, let's take care of our guys. You win a Stanley Cup, you can afford to say, okay, we'll take care of Tanev or Monahan after the season, but this is the hardest cup, the hardest championship to win. The better team statistically wins the least often in the playoffs of any of the 4 major sports in hockey in comparison to basketball, baseball, and football. That's why it's the best trophy. It's the hardest one to win.
And that's why I like it too, because you never know what upset is going to happen first and really who's going to ultimately be lifting the trophy. And I'm going to put money on the Flames not being in that conversation this year, but maybe in a few years from now, that will be a different story. But do you have anything else to add before we wrap up today's show?
Your friend on Facebook who's hearing things, he doesn't know anything.
No. Don't trust them. They're about as accurate as your great aunt that lives 4 states away sharing her medical opinions on Facebook. So we will see you tomorrow, or I'll see you tomorrow. I hope everyone has a good night. Hope you stay warm, stay safe. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you're getting your podcasts, and on YouTube as well. We just hit 400 subscribers, so thanks for tuning in and making that happen. Nick, any real final words?
I guess I'll go watch the All-Star Game draft now.
Oh yeah, that's a thing.